Here's a quick look at the final plumbing layout for the 100-gallon tank and for the 150-gallon tank. Really quick, let's look at the 100-gallon tank, and if you're setting this up exactly like I am, here are the spa hose measurements that I used, but I would still advise going and watching the assembly video. I've got a 19-inch piece of spa hose that connects the outlet of the tank to the lower pump assembly. I have a 21-inch piece of spa hose that connects the upper pump assembly to the in port on the chiller. I have a 22.5-inch piece of spa hose that connects the out port on the chiller to the inlet side of your filtration and sanitation system. And then finally, I have a 6-inch piece of spa hose that connects the filtration system to the inlet to your tank. These measurements are specific for the 100-gallon tank. And again, even if you're going to use these measurements, I still recommend watching the assembly video. Really quick, let's do the same thing with the 150. From the outlet of your tank to the lower pump assembly, there is a 10.5-inch piece of spa hose that connects those two. To connect the upper pump assembly to the in port on your chiller, I used a 25-inch piece of spa hose. To connect the out port on your chiller to the filtration and sanitation system, I used a 26-inch piece of spa hose. Then to connect the filtration and sanitation system to the inlet of your tub, I used a 13.25-inch piece of spa hose. Like I said, you can use these measurements to base your build off of if you're doing this exactly like me, but I still recommend watching the following assembly video just to get an idea of how everything goes. Now we want to start to arrange the primary components. So you'll get your chiller, your pump with the upper and lower assemblies, and your filtration and sanitation assembly. It's time to map out how everything is going to connect together. The goal is to take your outlet from your tank, connect it to the bottom part of your pump assembly. The top pump assembly will connect to the inlet on your chiller. The outlet of your chiller will connect to your filtration and sanitation system that will be mounted somewhere in this area. And then finally, your filtration and sanitation will connect to the inlet of your tank. The first thing to do is to map out where the filtration and sanitation system is going to land. Now, if I put my measuring tape at the bottom of the cedar board there, I'm gonna go about 4.5 inches down, and that is where I will put the screws for the mounting bracket. We attached this back panel because I wasn't quite sure if I would have one screw on this back panel or not. For me, I am going to be able to get it on these two slats, but you might be straddling one of the vertical slats and the back panel. It just depends on where your vertical siding panels ended up. Some of the things that I'm keeping in mind here are just the pipe length between the outlet of the filtration system and the return to your tank. That's about 4.5 inches between those two fittings, which I think is just fine. So I'm gonna take a Sharpie and I will roughly mark some areas. Again, this is about 4.5 inches down, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball where that might be. And the first thing to do is attach your first screw. You can eyeball level, or you can use a level to make sure that everything is level and locked in place. So with that roughly in place, we can mount our filtration system. So with your filtration system mounted, there may be a little bit of space on the back side here. That's important because what you don't want to do is pull this filtration system against that wall, because if you do that, this will start to go at an angle out this way, which will make connecting these two more difficult. Keep it tight on the right side, and you can leave a little space on the backside. With your system mounted, the first thing is attach the outlet of your filtration to the return on your tank. Now I've got about 4.5 inches between these two here. I'm going to custom cut a length of spa hose to go between these two. And I've always found that if you roughly hold these in place, kind of imagine where this would butt up to. Imagine where it would butt up to on the inside here. Draw your line, cut. Once you have a shorter piece to work with, you can kind of refine your measurement from there. I'll probably trim that down to about here. So you can fine tune your measurements there. The thing to think about when we prime and cement these together is to use the natural curve of the spa hose to help you out. To prime and cement these, I'm actually going to take the union off of the return to the chiller. I'll prime and cement these two here, and then we'll go in and prime and cement that one. And then again, when you attach these two, keep in mind the curve of that spa hose that you'll want to use. And then we'll just attach this, insert, twist, and hold that in place to let it set up. Once that's set up, we will prime and cement the other end into the filtration and sanitation system. So now we'll insert twist, and I'll hold it while I attach the PVC union here, just because we want to make sure everything lines up really nice. So I'm inserting with a twist, and then I'm attaching this union really quick before I go back and hold that as it sets up. Now we'll move on to attaching the filtration and sanitation system to the chiller. Now we're kind of working in reverse order. So the inside of your filtration and sanitation system is actually going to hook up to the outside on your chiller. And for me, the way I want to arrange everything here, the space between the chiller and the tank is about 6 inches. Knowing that, again, this is a rough measurement, but I'm gonna take my spa hose length, trim that to fit, and then we will prime and cement these together. And this just gives you an idea of chiller depth this way. I'm sitting right about here in relation to the stock tank. Now we'll get to priming and cementing there. And again, we are going to use the natural curve of this spa hose to help us out. And since we did unions, we can take this off for even easier connections. Then we'll insert twist and just kind of remember which way you want that spa hose working for you. I'm actually going to take the fitting off to attach it like this. I'm just going to roughly attach that there. Now we'll prime and cement here. And doing my best not to make a mess, we'll insert and twist this fitting here, and then just kind of roughly put that in place, and then we'll just hold to let that set up. And just when you thought we'd connect the chiller to the top of the pump, we're actually going to start at the outlet of the tank and connect a piece of spa hose there. Now, I'm going to start with just a very long piece of spa hose. I'm going to take this fitting off and just connect it here. Then we'll find our final position for our pump, trim this to fit, attach it with PVC primer and cement, and then move on to connecting the pump to the chiller. And then remembering to use the natural bend of the spa hose, we will insert this with a twist and hold while it sets up. And I always like to roughly attach that fitting if I can while this sets up. To find your final pump placement, there's a couple things that we want to think about. First is if you plan on either not having a chiller or needing to bypass the chiller. If you're not using a chiller right away, that answer is obvious, but if you live in a place that sees substantial winter, you might want to think about doing the optional chiller bypass assembly, which is just a PVC elbow that ties the pump directly into the filtration system. And if you are going to utilize that, you want to make sure that your vertical pump assembly is on this side of the PVC union, just to give yourself room to add that PVC elbow there. And overall, something like this would be my preferred recommendation. But again, you can make your own choices there. And the reasoning is, one, what we just mentioned, to have that chiller bypass. And two, I typically have found it best if the length of hose from the outlet of your tank to the inlet of your pump is as short as you can have it. And the only other thing to think about when we do this is the positioning of the final hose from the in port on the chiller to the top pump assembly. We just don't want these two hoses to cross in front of each other. We just want everything to play well together. So actually, right here is about where I will assemble everything together. We'll start with trimming the spa hose on the bottom, priming and cementing into the ball valve here, and then we'll move on to the last hose. Then to make things easier, I'm just going to detach the ball valve, but remember, when we assemble these together, we will want this ball valve to be somewhere in the upright position so we can fully turn the ball valve to shut off and on as we need. We'll insert and twist, and as that's setting up, I just like to roughly put it in place so I know that the ball valve will be in the correct position to be able to use it to turn things on and off. Now we are on to the final PVC spa hose connection, and I'm going to start by just installing this tubing onto the chiller fitting. And then again, keeping in mind the direction of the spa hose that we want it to end up in, I will insert this with a little twist, and then I'll hold that in place as that sets up. And we can move the primer and cement off the chiller and tighten up that fitting. Here I'm taking my final trim cut measurement there, and so I'll trim that off, and then we'll attach this with PVC primer and cement. And as always, anything that's on unions, you can detach to help make life a little bit easier. So I will insert this with a twist and then connect that back to help it all set up in place. So when all is said and done, this is what your plumbing setup should look like. You'll have unions that you can detach at both the inlet and outlet of your tank. You'll have ball valves to shut off water access to your pump, and unions to be able to detach that, remove the pump, service it, replace it, whatever, down the road. You'll have unions at the top of the pump assembly and at the filtration assembly to add a chiller bypass later on if needed. But everything will tie together seamlessly from the outlet of your tank, through your pump, through your chiller, through the filtration and sanitation system, back into your tank. And so this is what everything should look like before we do our leak test.